Because no one lays on their deathbed and says, gee, I wish I didn't take that trip, or I wish I didn't. Life is so short.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so much, like, and I'm getting to an age where, friends are not thankfully passing away yet, but from natural causes, but, I mean, in an instant.
Yeah.
It is literally in 30 seconds, it's done. So that's part of my motivation too, is you can't take any of this shit with you. I mean, I'm gay, but it took me a long time to come out. And all the negative and all the fear and the panic attacks and all that stuff, you just want to get it out. Yeah, I mean, you're not alone. And we all have the same thoughts. None of us are immune. You're not crazy in how you think. You're not alone in what you think. That was another big aha. It's just, we all have it.
What I really had an interest in you on was when you came in that night and you were just so outwardly, you were like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. And
Thank you.
I mean, it was awesome. That's not normal. Well, what do I mean is normal? Is that that's not a normal way of most people engaging themselves. What do I mean by that? You go to the South, right? And you've heard of like the Southern hospitality and you get like an experience of that. At least I did. And I was like, wow, it was really nice that everybody's just like randomly, how are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, having a good day? You're like, wow, this is like nobody's asked me before. You just naturally came in like with this charisma and you just started saying hello to everybody that was there at the moment. What kind of led you to trying to, you being cognizant of presenting yourself that way? Like, what does that look like?
I've been like that apparently forever. I mean,
Where did that come from?
Youngest of 5, independent raising, like mom working, dad divorced, never around, neither parent around. I'm a Gen Xer. So we had to basically raise ourselves. Being a smaller guy, I felt I wasn't that athletic. I mean, I'd played some sports, but I didn't have the size to do any, actual competition on a school team. So I always went with humor and just fell back on personality and humor. But it's fun. And thank you, by the way, for saying that. I pride myself on being able to talk to anyone. And obviously, or not obviously, innately, it comes from, I just have this curiosity of everyone else, I keep living my own story, my own journey. And I mean, we just talked about how, as you post these, maybe they'll get something out of it. When I meet others, I honestly think and feel that each one of them has their own story. We all suffer from the same crap. It just manifests differently. I mean, my ex, my straight past roommate, like they've made many comments over and over again. I'll go into a party, not know anyone, and come out with so many names. I was on a cruise by myself just the last month, and I was known as Tim from Vegas from several passengers because I made an effort. But it's more than it's not a conscious decision. It's just it's my persona. I literally thrive on starting a conversation with people, showing that innate curiosity, and then just listening, and then fascinated, and then sharing, like, oh my gosh, I did this. Is that? Or, like, oh, wasn't that great when you did this? And so that's really where it's come from.
And for you, it's always come natural. There was no trying involved.
Mm-mm.
I find it so hard to believe.
Mm-mm. I mean, it just like back to, well, that's not true. So naturally, maybe since.
And by the way, correction, not I find you hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that it was innate.
No, right. Obviously not when you're in, the terrible junior highs, but I think it evolved mostly like late high school and then into college.
What shaped that? Like, help me understand. What did it look like for you, junior high, high school, college, where you had to have had a, like what we call a come to Jesus moment where you just recognize, I don't know if this is me or this is my path, Because there's so many people that struggle with this idea of self-identity of like, what am I and who am I?
No, true. And
What
that's
did that look like for you?
That's a great question because my self-identity evolved. As you're saying that question, I'm thinking this more social outgoingness evolved in college because I finally got to live on my own and just be independent. And that just added self-confidence, met tons of new people at college, did the school thing. It was a catch-22 because I'm doing, in hindsight, I was doing the standard conforming, very structured degree. I'm the youngest of 5. I mentioned all of us were expected to get the degree, get a college degree, get the good job, get the promotion, repeat, rinse, blah, blah, blah. So I did that, but it was during those years in college, post-high. I mean, my last 2 years of high school were awesome because I was able to finally really connect with some people and have some good friends throughout and did well in school. And then the combination of that just felt good. And then so college was just the natural extension of that. So I was now just doing it with college mates instead of high school mates. And yeah, just had fun and learned. And I mean, there were struggles. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I remember even like post-college, my first job was at Westinghouse. And I was just, okay, get to know these people. I mean, because I guess I came with an innate knowledge too of just, I've had this cognitive empathy forever.
But it comes from somewhere. And I think that, and I'm hoping that I'm doing a good job, is what you believe comes innate. A lot of times when we pry, we figure out there was actually like this series of fortunate events that have led for me to have this kind of worldview. Not always,
No,
right? But
yeah.
sometimes. So my curiosity is, how does somebody get there with that mentality? So you just said it was impactful to you once you were finally out on your own, you started seeing some things differently. What about being on your own was the difference maker than all the other time before? Because you were talking about college, right?
Well, you just reminded me. I mean, I think some of that worldly exposure was from a young age. My mom more so than my dad, even before the divorce. Like she had taken the 3 oldest to Knott's Berry Farm when my older brother and I were too young. But then when we were old enough, she took the 2 of us on a train trip across Canada.
Oh.
So it was a way to say, okay, the older 3 had theirs. This is yours. So she was just an avid traveler. Took a freighter around the world for 90 days, like under South America, under Africa. She was one of 11 passengers
On
a freighter,
like a freight liner?
a
Commercial.
freighter, where like with all of the shipping containers. Yeah. And it was
You could do that?
90 days. Yeah, there were, like the crew must have been 100, but there were only 11 passengers.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, and the other thing is, my sister worked in Glacier Park when she was in college, and I went and visited her and took a train out. So when I got old enough, I did that. And I went during one of my college summers, spent a summer working in Glacier, and then spent a summer working at Cedar Point, and spent a summer working in Tahoe, because I figured this is the only time I'm going to get to do it. So every summer I had off, I was out of state having a blast and experiences and meeting and just doing it intentionally.
So that
was in college.
I don't know if you would call it a yearn, but that sense of adventure.
Yeah.
Do you think you got that from your mom?
Maybe, probably. I mean, I don't. There wasn't any big catalytic moment of that.
No, sure. But because remember, I'm just experiencing this with you right now. What I see is that you had, so think of it this way. If we have no concept of something, we never see it as a possibility. If your parents have 3rd generation in that same town, you never think about going to the next town over. So just this ability for maybe your mother, this is what I'm seeing, right? Of just being so willing to say, hey, let's go. Do you feel like that you never had to have that, maybe that internal struggle is like, we live here.
And my older sister did it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
She spent a summer, I forget, like in Stone Harbor, and then she spent a summer in Montana. So it was...
It's almost like it was normalized in your family. You're like,
totally.
hey, what do you mean you don't
and
travel?
And I was just like, oh my God, what can I... And then when my first summer away was Cedar Point in Ohio, and I went to Penn State in Pennsylvania. It wasn't far. And I remember taking the Greyhound bus from Pittsburgh to Sandusky over Christmas break to interview.
And how old are you this time?
I'd finished my sophomore year in college, so I was 19.
Yeah.
And at the time, I guess my best experience would have been in kitchen, like I had been a server or a busser or, something in a restaurant, something around food. And I remember going to that interview, and that's what I interviewed for, is like, okay, I can work in a restaurant. Fine, took the bus back that same day. And that's December. Then went back to school for that term. Oh, yeah, I guess I was 19. So didn't hear. And a fellow student of mine up at Penn State found out she got a job at the marina. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard back. So I just started calling. This is long before internet and phones. So I kept calling and saying, well, I want to come. To where they finally, my last call said, oh my God, if we just say yes, will you stop calling?
Oh, wow.
And I said yes. And so then, honestly, when I got to Sandusky, everyone else is in line at the uniform shop with their paperwork. And they hand it to the person, and based on what they're going to do, are you working in a booth? Are you working on a ride?
Yeah.
They got their associated colored uniform. I got there, and mine was blank. And they're like, well, what do you do? I said, oh, kitchen. And they're like, okay, Marina Steakhouse. And that's honestly where I got placed.
Just because you asked for it?
Well, no, just because they put me there. And I remember, like, in the first few weeks I was there, I cut myself twice and had to go to the nurse, like, with a knife.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't exactly the best kitchen worker yet. And I remember the manager saying, you do that a third time, Dean, you're out. But it was phenomenal. I mean, it just was such a life-affirming experience on so many levels.
But what was the affirmingness of it? What is it that you saw? Like, what was the glitter in your eye? What made it feel so big?
I mean, just the fun, the doing the work really well. My roommate, my more long-term roommate, Brian, who I worked with, he was a fellow cook. I mean, we just clicked. I mean, we'd go play volleyball and intramurals. We wouldn't get off shift until 11:30 or 12, and then we'd go play intramurals on the sand at 1:30 in the morning, and then go back the next day. And then I showed such a potential is I was the only employee that was on triple shift. They
Oh, wow.
wanted me there for all 3 meals because I was good at expediting and organizing and keeping things steady. So my schedule was pretty crappy, but, so I would work 7 to 9:30 or 10, 12:30 to 3, and then 5 to 7.
Oh, man, that's like a whole day.
But then I'd go to the beach and hang out or play animal when you got to ride the rides. Yeah, it was phenomenal.
So what I'm noticing here is, for you, is it just this idea of like a collection of experiences that you
Yes.
feel has been the constant glass ceiling for you? You're like, wow.
What's next?
Right.
100%.
Do you think it also still falls back to like a sense of adventure, like
Yes.
innately in you?
Yes.
You talk-
That's how I live now. I
Can
mean,
you
now I do it purposefully, intentionally, and decisionally, and I'm making a word up. Like I obviously took years of learning how to say no and just say, that's not part of it.
Can you help me understand that mentality? Right? Because what if I have a bad sense of adventure? Maybe I should have a better one. I travel, but I don't think I look at traveling in the same way. I look at traveling just getting out. You look at it as like this sense of adventure, of wonder, like what could be.
Totally.
So can you just help
But
me
it does-
understand your way you look at it?
I mean, your way is okay too. It's not less than.
No. It's more of the I'm interested in your way of
Oh,
looking
yeah,
at
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So help me understand, like,
I guess it's just been, I've just been so interested in the adventure of it, of the newness of it.
mhm.
Yeah, just like when I have that next trip coming up, I'm excited about. Like when I moved to Australia, not 4 years ago. Obviously, I knew no one, but it's such a long story, but I teased wanting interest in 2019 It took until 2021 or 2020 or 21 for the company to come back to me and say, "Oh, we have an interest or we have an opening in Melbourne, Australia. Would you be interested in interviewing for it?" And I think my only question was, "How long do I have to pack?" So, but I didn't think I'd get it because this is a prior company I used to work with back in Pittsburgh. So I understood their hiring process is laborious. There's multiple layers of live interviews. There's an entire assessment day, a life in the day of simulation where you have to go through emails and voicemails and reply and be a manager, and while you're simultaneously preparing a presentation so that you then have to give, and then all of it is evaluated and assessed and graded. And I remember that day ended and I was like, damn, I did my best, never thinking I'd get it, but then I got it. But then it took a year for the visa to get approved. But it was so life driven. For years, in every corporate job I ever had, I wanted an international assignment, and it never came to fruition. So when this surfaced, I was like, blinders. Do everything you can to get it, and then when I got it, do everything you can to just live it, even if it's for a month.
But how do you, so naturally you would say, I want to plan a trip. Then you think, great, what is it going to cost? And then you think, okay, great, that's money that I could put something else. And then you're like, well, I don't know what I would do. So there's always these counterpoints that happen in your mind when you think about a sense of adventure for most normal people.
But two of those, I don't think of that.
But that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So what is it that you do? It just never enters your mind? Or you just know how to
validate it.
So continue. Can you explain that?
I mean, like, I work to live, and my live is adventurizing. So it's if I can rationalize spending it on something like the cruise I took, then of course I'm going to do it because I'd never been. This cruise was around the British Isles, so my whole family went to Ireland. My siblings and niece and my goddaughter all went to Dublin for the Steelers Minnesota Vikings game, and I'm sitting in Vegas like, damn it. So when this UK or a British Isles cruise that I purposely looked up had Ireland in it and Dublin and Scotland, which I'd never been to either, I said, it's now or never. Like, I'm tired of waiting. So I just finally said, do it. And that was it. There was no, yes, it cost something, but I was like, I'll figure it out. I'd rather, it's all because of I don't like regret.
Why?
Because no one lays on their deathbed and says, gee, I wish I didn't take that trip, or I wish I didn't. Life is so short.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so much, like, and I'm getting to an age where, friends are not thankfully passing away yet, but from natural causes. But, I mean, in an instant,
yeah,
it is literally in 30 seconds, it's done. So that's part of my motivation too, is you can't take any of this shit with you.
What made you start thinking of that? Because remember, as far as anybody that's listening, they understand you as a college student that went out, did a lot of adventuring, and now we're talking about something that you get much later in life. What made you start thinking in those terms? Was it age? Was it experience?
Yeah, age, experience, wisdom, maybe, some really losses, people that took their own life where you just think, oh my God, like friends, and one of my brother's best friend where you just think, oh my God, what a waste. And I can't even, I can imagine the mental, this is the only out. I just feel, it's so sad. So, and that's my empathy, and I just feel that. And that's what drives and maybe that's the basis of it. The foundation is the empathy, the cognitive empathy that's just always been there. And it's what has helped create that determination for adventure, meeting people, curiosity. Maybe that's the core.
So what exactly has brought you to that? Of course, there's a lot of things, but I'm looking more for you to share some of your own personal ways 100%. That you've had, say, look, I've had this happen. So I'll share, right? Like, I'll kind of tell you kind of what came up for me. I was really looking at how my family was living life. And family's family. It's all about family. We all have to stick together. And then as 16, 17-year-old, I just started realizing, I was like, all I see is my family hurt each other. All I see is my family be difficult with each other. There's no support here. And I just was lucky enough to have friends on the side where I would feel support or I would have a conversation. I felt like I was getting way more from them than I was from my own family. But it was beat into me, you got to hang out with family. Family's everything. Family has to be the unit. So anyway, I share that to say that's what started making me think outside the box and say, okay, great. Like, is there more to this?
There is.
And then ultimately what I started realizing was, you know what? It's actually the relationship that matters. It doesn't matter who it's with. And it's no more special if it's with the blood family member or not. What matters is the authenticity of the relationship and the ability to share with that person.
Right.
So then that made me start changing the way that I look at just relationshiping with anyone, even like, let's say with you. It's the interaction between you and I and the authenticity that I can maintain. That's how I grade my relationships. How high of a score do I get? How well are you doing that? And how well am I doing that?
Right.
Of course, I'm not here to tell you need to do more. I just have to be able to look at that with that same barometer and say, look, I need to measure myself the same way. I don't know if I'm doing enough. I should reach out. I didn't even ask them, like, how was your day?
Right.
Everything going good?
Yeah.
So these is how I now look at that situation of wanting to relationship and understand why I want to do it better. So your sense of like adventure and all of these things, I'm so curious to find out, how did you get there? Because it's what I love that you think it's normal. I love that you've normalized it, right?
Well, I've had many years but now you're taking me back to 1993. So
Let's hear about
that's
that.
many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned, did the old conforming, got the jobs, went to grad school, during my first job. So, because that was the trajectory that was expected. But I remember at the same time, now we're talking, I'm in my mid to late 20s. And I remember, I'm gay, but it took me a long time to come out. And dated women through my late teens, early 20s, was almost engaged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when I went to grad school, it was the perfect backdrop to always use an excuse when I could say no to any type of social thing. Meaning, no, they're not going to see me dateless. They're not going to see me and question, oh, you didn't bring any woman or bring a girl. Because I was working full time, going to grad school at night, every Tuesday and Thursday in class from 6 to 10. Every Wednesday, Saturday was down at campus in group. I had no schedule, but it was a perfect fallback. Like when I got invited to things that I wouldn't be exposed.
So this must have been on your mind. This wasn't that you just didn't understand. How I'm hearing it is you always suspected something. You just couldn't put your finger on it. And so then what you did is you just did things. You just lived, never looking back as to what does it mean.
I was having sex with men. I just hadn't come out to anyone.
Yeah, fair. But you could separate that even.
Oh, it was completely separate.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting to is part of my aha when I finally did come out and the whole family reaction. It's a paradox because every person has their own journey, and I'll always say to anyone, you do it when you're ready.
Yeah.
No one has any right to say sooner or later, whatever. Or never. That's your call.
Yeah.
But I remember when I got to the point, now I had to build myself up and recognize if I had to be okay with if every single person in my life was going to say, fuck you, I had to be okay with that. The reason that was so important is twofold. One, you have to get there on your own to then have to say, okay, I'm just going to come out. But the paradox is all of the reactions, at least for me, were never the worst case scenario that I had anticipated or had predicted or had assumed or had said, even if they all happen, none of that came to fruition.
Yeah.
And I was almost like mad. Like, wait a minute. Like, you're accepting? Like, no, come on, let's get into like some argument or something. But I had to get there, part A. But part B was, and this is part of this huge revelation, is I realized then, I was 26 or 7 at the time, I'll never experience something that's 20 years long again and have such a thumb on. Like nothing will ever hurt me and affect me and prevent me and resist, have such its hold on me for close to 3 decades ever again. And when I knew I could come through that and know that it'll never be that bad again. Oh, I'm getting chills.
See?
It was a huge revelation. Like, oh my God, that's the worst. And I'm done. And I'm out.
I want you to see that this whole time I've asked you, and none of this came to mind until now. And this is what I mean. Is there, you have normalized so many things of like, it's normal. But when we go back and think about it, we find these miraculous things that happen in our life that just are
Right.
like, it shapes the way we look at the world.
They are
and that's
titanic
massive.
shifts.
Yeah.
Massive shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Massive. And massive thought processes and confidence builders. I mean, it was like this anvil just lifted, besides coming out.
Right.
But in hindsight, and I think that's part of what I do. I do a lot of reflecting. Like a lot of society and a lot of focus is on what's next. And, even in my coaching practice, I'm always adamant about, let's give reflecting equal time. Let's acknowledge what you've accomplished and come through, and not just survived, but thrived through. And I do that with myself all the time. Maybe I should do it more, because I haven't thought of this in a while.
No, I'm just glad you shared it. To me, these are the magical moments that I hope for, because there has to be somebody else out there that's just not reflecting in the same
As
way.
much. No one's reflecting as
Yeah.
much as they should.
And
No one does.
Correct. And you sharing, I really appreciate it, because
Sorry.
then somebody is going to hopefully hear this and say, his story's like mine. There's this thing that I haven't been looking. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but it could be like, I haven't had that conversation with my mom,
Right.
or my cousin, like whatever happened. I haven't buried that hatchet. We're here 20 years in, all of these things I feel, as you've pointed out, stop you from progressing. But the only way to progress is to digest. You have to look back and say, what is causing this resistance for me to go forward? And I just really appreciate that you shared that story. I want more of those, by the way, because I'm sure you're full of them. And my job is to try to get them out of you somehow. So
I remember when I was 6. I remember no.
So now that we understand that where you had this, there was actually, I'm assuming now a big part of you as well, for you to get some of this confidence that you have today. Because I don't see how you would carry that, not being clear and safe and outwardly with your sexuality, to then have the confidence that you do today if you didn't accept that. You follow? Like,
Oh, totally.
as a progression?
Totally. Oh, yeah.
So that's one small piece of like who you've become today. What really started getting you thinking about, what? I'd like to be a life coach, because that's a big jump from what we know about your story right now. Like, to me, I don't see it. So there had to have been something there.
Totally.
So can you explain a little bit
100%.
what you...
My undergrad at Penn State was engineering. So yeah, and then I went to master's for marketing, and then I was a product marketing engineer, and then I was a marketing consultant, and then but again, those were all the trajectory, standard, conforming, and 6 figures and moving, and I was on that trajectory and path for many years. And I know exactly when I started the transition of knowledge of like coaching. What? I was living in St. Louis with my ex at the time, and we had moved there from California for a job I got. And now, mind you, prior to that, I had already left not one, not two. No, yeah, I had left 2 separate corporate jobs, sight unseen, without even another job offer at all, let alone even a coffee scheduled to start networking. But they just reached a point where I was just done with it. It was no longer fulfilling. And that's maybe part of this whole story too, is that on my professional journey, when I reached like the breaking point, I didn't just sit and take it.
Can you take me through that?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well,
How does somebody know they're at the breaking point?
Yeah, the first one was in California. It was a small company, moved actually to California for the job and the relationship, and thought it would have many legs, but it just it always gets back to the manager. It always gets back to the support or lack thereof. It was a small, like 10-person company, and the manager was a dick. Full of himself, just an ass. And I was there maybe 8 months, And
Why was that impacting you though? There's so many people that just grind it out. They could
oh,
have the
totally.
world's worst boss and they'll just say, it's the job. Just keep going.
Because
So
because
why did that change for
because
you?
when it starts affecting my mental state and my sleeping and my health, that's when I say time out and try and adjust or and I tried to work on it and talk to people at the office and talk to friends and
What are some things that people should look for that you could share about you that you saw within yourself to say, look, maybe you need to take a step back? What does that look like?
yeah, I mean I used my engineering mindset to just try and write down pros and cons of
Interesting.
like literally put it in writing and look at the list volume wise, less on the actual level of intensity of each one, but just the volume. Um, and the breaking point I remember was you keep trying, you keep trying, you keep trying. And I've heard so many stories. I mean, even a good mate of mine recently just shared like a story where it just turned into the end. I'm not going to get into too specifics just for, I don't want him to, it's
Yeah,
confidentiality.
correct. No.
But I mean, I can relate to it so much because I mean, when you're sitting in the office, either sobbing or like just so frustratingly, like don't know what to do, but like at your wit's end, that's when I know it's time. But the first one was the hardest, and that was the California one. Then I went to St. Louis, got a job, and that was another reason I was able to do it is I knew I could network. I was very good at networking. Back to the relationship building and back to the knocking on the door. People are so apprehensive to just start a conversation. They don't know what to say, but I already had all that. So people kept saying, you should write a book on how to get a job because you're always good at getting it. And okay. So I got another job in Missouri, St. Louis. So we moved, packed up, went to St. Louis. And that one was a great run. 2 years, I was VP of marketing. 4 of us were on the leadership team. And it was very rewarding, very motivating. We were making an impact. The only rub there was it was a family-owned business. And each of the 2 owners, like the curmudgeons, couldn't work in the same building.
Yeah.
And each of them had family or offspring, but they each owned 50% of the company. So
Yeah, you're not going much.
you're not
You're not
doing
going
anything.
anywhere there. Yeah.
Not 51 or 49,
Yeah.
but 50-50. So when one would say yin, the other one would say yang. And that had been, the company was started in the 50s. So that had been going on for decades. So it lasted about 2 years to where even the president left, and I just, again, gave it my birthday gift to myself. I remember my birthday's in November. I gave 5 weeks notice and said, I will be done by Christmas. And that
How did you get to that conclusion though? How did you figure out that it was time?
Again, because there was no advancement, there was no growth, there was no learning anymore. There was just nothing left for me there. And I'm not just going to spin wheels. No amount of money's worth it to affect my sanity.
Can I point out something I think is interesting?
Oh,
It almost
please.
seems that you use your skill sets in engineering to try to take a more objective overview of what you're trying to do because you're trying to break it down very methodically to say pro con, here's this, so that you can almost remove your emotion from it and say, look, I have to accept whatever I see here on my diagram or whatever that was, right?
Yeah.
I just find it interesting because it's a great way for somebody that may experience too much emotion and say, man, I don't know if I want to leave this place. I love this place. It's like, but what does the objective way of looking at it look like?
Devil's advocate. I was never in a place I love this place anymore. No way. It had reached its end. And the irony is I had spent so many years stability, longevity, tenure at my previous companies, and now here we are, 8 months, 2 years. And then the final straw, getting to your question from minutes ago about coaching, was I left that company. I went to a startup first. Was employee number 7, 2 young entrepreneurs. It was a marketing online company. And that was a huge learning curve, fire hose of stuff. I was the oldest employee by far.
You mean wisest?
I'm sorry?
I said, you mean wisest, right?
Wisest, thank you. But I didn't leave that company. I got poached out by my final corporate position. Another company in St. Louis, an HR consulting company, another family-owned business. I should have, red flag. But it was twice the money, and I was like, okay, it's time to make my worth again. So went to that, and that was the shortest of all and the most toxic. 4 months max. And that was another like sobbing. And when it just, I should have known better, but I still did it. But it had to happen. That last punch in the gut had to happen. I couldn't have circumvented my journey in a way because that finally was enough. Because I was rinse repeat on, oh, I'll get another job and get another, and I get another, and I'm fine. But it finally had to hit me, okay, this may not be your thing anymore. But I had zero knowledge of what was next, of what was coming next.
So,
And a gentleman who I trusted in St. Louis, a good mate, sat me down in a coffee shop and honestly just kept asking me questions. He's like, so Tim, tell me a time where you just felt the most rewarded. And tell me the situation, regardless of whether it was part of a job or volunteer work or a task force or off the clock. Just tell me a story about that. Tell me that. And then he said, okay, there's a virtual dot. Give me another example. And then I shared that. Give me another. In essence, he's like, now let's connect all those dots. There's your thread. Now let's think about, what do they all have in common? What he was doing is he was coaching me.
right.
And I was like, oh my God. And he said, Tim, there's an industry that is that. And that honestly is how I got introduced to it. I knew nothing about it. And he said, there's an industry out there. It's called coaching. And that was catalytic and mind-blowingly life-changing, because then it was like, oh my God, okay, tell me more. Or go ahead.
So I was going to ask, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. You're an amazing person, right? But I think all of us still have to deal with this sense of, well, am I really the right person? Like imposter syndrome.
I didn't know what I was doing.
So can you like share, what does that look like for you and how you had to, I mean, to be where you are today, you had to figure it out, right?
I mean, again, this is going to sound so cliche. In hindsight, the more you keep doing it, the more confidence you have that you know that you can do it again and again. But to those listeners out there, that very first time or even just that second time can be paralyzing.
So take me there. I want to know where you were. What did that storm look like and how did you weather it? Because those are the important parts. This is where we all get to learn from each other.
No, true. Oh, well, it's ironic that little startup I talked to you about before my last corporate toxic position, we went to a retreat, all 15 of us or whatever, and these young entrepreneurs, had a startup where they were an incubator for all these young people to then start their own companies. And I remember at that retreat, raise your hand if you want to start your own company. Everyone in the room raised their hand except me. Because I was like, I'm not an entrepreneur. What are you talking about? I've always been a corporate team player. And that was part of the reason I let myself get poached out of there. Fast forward a year, now I'm in a coaching certification program, going on GoDaddy and signing up for a URL for my coaching practice. And that was a huge, like, dude, this was a thought I'd had convinced myself for years. And I'm flipping the script like that. That helps just recognize nothing's forever.
But what did some of that internal dialogue sound like? Because this is where, again, I'll start by, as an example, this podcast.
Oh, totally.
My first episode I put on YouTube was 11 years ago. I did it with some mics that I just kind of scrounged up together, was trying to have conversations with friends, just like I am now. And I put it out, and I was like, I don't believe in myself.
Right.
Why should anybody listen to what I have to say? Why?
Oh, I remember.
What makes me special?
Well, back to your imposter syndrome comment. I remember when I got certified, during that process was frightening because I knew nothing about it. And here were this person who's saying to me, like the end game was to get a certification in becoming a professional coach. And I'm thinking, how am I going to charge someone for what I do? Like, who's going to pay me? How do I convince someone that, like, what value am I bringing to this? It was mind-numbingly, like, just, I was ignorant to it, but also, what am I doing?
So what did you have to change within yourself to recognize or to have answers to some of those questions you said. Because really what they are is questions that we don't have answers to.
Right.
And because we don't have answers, we take it as doubt.
Well, the biggest fear we all have. Fear is the biggest thing that prevents all of us from getting what we want. And as I learned, and part of my getting over it during that starting my business was in the training. There was a big aha where I learned there's 5 thoughts that prevent each of us from getting what we want. And that's been my mantra since then, since I started my practice in 2012. And no one's immune. Not me, not you, not every
Right.
listener listening to this. When your awareness can grasp those and mitigate and lessen the grip they have, I guess the big secret is, and it's not even really a secret, it's practice of just witness your thought. Like imagine your thoughts are on a merry-go-round and we're constantly on the merry-go-round, can't get off, and we tell the same thoughts and the negative and the self-doubt and the projecting and the what do other people think, and a merry-go-round never stops, always in a circle. Just once, try and practice, witness above it. See yourself on that horse, on the merry-go-round, and just witness a thought as opposed to being sucked into it in the spiral, Alice in Wonderland black hole of aggravation and fear and the same tapes you keep saying to yourself over and over and over again. We've had so much practice with that.
So how did you apply that?
When I got certified, part of my practice includes what's called positive affirmations that I then use with every client in their own words and their own voice. But then I also do it for myself.
Right. Like give me an example of you using it on yourself so that somebody has like I get what he's saying. Like I could see it from his perspective. Like, do you have one? Otherwise I'll share one if you want.
I have a whole tape of them. It's through 6 areas: career, family, and each one of them has.
Yeah, but just more of an example of how you do that in practice, like in a real world.
Yeah. And they're always I statements.
Right. Funny how that starts.
Let's see. I am the master of my thoughts.
Okay, and that's like an affirmation.
Yeah, that's just it's a statement.
Okay.
I see my thoughts and they are not mine.
So the process of saying I is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm scratching at?
Yes. I see that.
Yeah. So I'll share, right? Because this is something that was very important to me.
Yeah, go.
I still do it to this day. I try to be better about it, but I catch myself always having conversations with people and say we. All of us, right? Most of us.
Right.
And it's really bad in practice because I try to change it and say, stop coming from the something else, redirect the conversation from the I. Like, what did I do?
Right.
Or how do I do that thing? I'm telling, it's not most of us to most of us do it. It's I do it. And every time I have to do that, it's hard because you have to take a step back and reframe the way that you're looking at it.
Oh, it's a conscious thought.
Yeah.
Because you have to stop the thoughts coming out of your brain and your mouth and rephrase it. Can I share a similar?
You can share whatever you want.
This is fun. In my growing up, as the youngest, I got tons of hand-me-downs. All things were shared. We were taught growing up. My mom was, from the 40s, or, was a parent in the 60s and 70s. And it was all about sharing and, don't be selfish and all that. Don't. But I remember a consequence of that was even through my young adult years, I was horrible at accepting a compliment from anyone. And I would always, it was a team effort, similar to what you're saying, like group it.
Mm-hmm.
Or, so-and-so helped too. Like I would always want to include someone. Like, oh, no.
Why did you find it so hard to take a compliment?
Because I didn't want to be the center of attention. I didn't want people to look at me, which all stems back to being gay and all of those years of I just want to be observant. I don't want to be the person that everyone's looking at, because if they do so often, they may see me as gay.
That's so beautiful. You just put all that together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the fun part is I remember saying this to a therapist. Like, he asked, well, Tim, why is it so hard to, give me more examples? And I'd say, well, you're just saying that. And he's like, wait, stop. You actually insulted the person giving you the compliment by saying you're just saying that, like making it glib or making a joke of it. And I was like, yeah. And the therapist said, dear God, Tim, 2 words, thank you, and then shut the fuck up. And
So
honest
true.
to God, I've been practicing that ever since. And that's even when you sat down and gave me a compliment. The first thing you said about my, you noticed how I came in and said hello to you. I just
Yeah.
said thank you. And that's been conscious practice for years. And that's the other thing people hopefully listening recognize. Be patient. None of this is instant. And none of it is over. That's the other big aha is, when I realized on my trajectory in the standard conforming job, I was striving for some imaginary pinnacle.
Yeah.
And then when I realized that was a total imaginary pinnacle and it was just a misnomer, I was like, oh my God. It just, again, you just let go of it. And that can be so helpful as opposed to doing things you feel you have to or feeling things you're doing things because others are saying you should. No, you don't.
That's
Just
awesome. Can I share a story with you about
please.
that? So I was just talking to a friend recently, and they're doing a lot of internal like growth work. They're
Good.
looking at themselves, trying to be as introspective as one can at wherever they are in their journey. And one of the things that they shared was, "Hey, I feel like I'm here. Like I've arrived at this place," because he's having these self-reflective moments that feel, wow, I think I understand myself better now than I did yesterday. So I am now here. I feel like I'm in a better place of knowing myself. I said, hey, is it okay if I support you? It's really about, don't look at it as a destination that you're trying to arrive to, because you're never going to get there.
There is no, that's the iron or the whole thing. The paradox again, it's my favorite word. There is no end. It's just enjoy the journey of it and the experience. That's another reason bringing it back to the whole, all about experiencing, never about obtaining or achieving or reaching.
So I want to connect those 2 dots with what you just said.
Yeah.
I said, could you possibly start thinking about it just as a glass ceiling? All you're doing is going up these steps, and eventually you reach that threshold where you thought what was possible, and you broke through that, and just to realize there was just more steps and another glass ceiling. I said, if you think of it that way, there's never a destination to reach. It's this continuous loop that you're going through.
Right.
You're achieving, you're slowly moving up, you hit your boundary, and then you pass it. I was like, that's just a cycle. But to touch on what you were saying, I shared that with him so that he understood you have to go get those experiences, because the experiences are the steps.
And the failure and the loss
Yes.
and the pain and again, you can't, my favorite analogy, and hopefully many listeners will see this and relate, is the end of The Wizard of Oz when the wizard in his balloon has left her and she's all distraught. But then the good witch Glinda comes back and says, well, you could have clicked your heels any time and gone home back to Kansas. And the Scarecrow says, well, why didn't you tell her before? And do you remember what she said?
I don't know.
She said 2 sentences. The first one was, well, she wouldn't have believed me. The second sentence is the one I wanted to share as the thought is, she had to learn it on her own. And that's a huge liberating thing to let go of too, is that it's all about letting go of control of what you have no control over. Like we try and control things.
So can you share a little bit of how you do that?
I'm reminded of it, certainly. Like when my Achilles heel is I've learned to take compliments and say thank you. What I'm not, what I'm still recognizing, learning from is, someone will give me some attention, specifically a man, and I'll start to project like, oh, this could have potential. I'll look into it too much. I'll project too much. I'll envision too much. And I catch myself. I just did it the last month, like where I was like, oh my God, what am I? And it's almost like that happiness aura of the potential,
The butterflies, right?
the butterflies.
We love the
yeah.
butterflies.
And it had been a while. And then I just catch myself like, oh God, Like, how crazy is this? And like, this is lunacy. And like, bring it back. Like, give yourself time. Uh, like I journal a lot, not on a paper because I'm a faster typer. Like, I just have this long running diatribe of thoughts dating back years, and I never use
Is that
it.
a process that you find helpful for you that helps you really
100%,
digest a lot
100%.
of your experiences?
It's less about digest and it's all more about just spewing it out. It's
Okay.
amazing how that merry-go-round, when it's really becoming more overwhelming, I just get on the computer and just spit it all out. Oh, good, bad, ugly, etc.
Do you know why that works for you? Because I find it interesting. You're such a great speaker, and yet your own personal way of processing certain things, you're like writing it. I know people that write, like handwrite.
Yeah.
They'll talk to you all day, but to truly connect with whatever those thoughts are, they find it within themselves that they have to write it.
Oh no,
And then it's like a process for them.
I feel better organizing them
Yeah.
as I type because I can type faster than write,
Mm-hmm.
and my thoughts are just racing
Mm-hmm.
because that's the merry-go-round.
Yeah.
When you're bouncing and ricocheting and all the negative and all the fear and the panic attacks and all that stuff, you just want to get it out. There was one time this was in St. Louis at that toxic last corporate job, and it was affecting my health. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and I remember I got my laptop and my partner's asleep, and I just have the laptop open, and it's dark except for the little light from the laptop, and I'm just typing feverishly just to get it. And then I must have fallen asleep.
Oh, wow.
'Cause then
As you're typing?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's the point, is that once you get it out, it's out. And it's captured. And I can always say to myself, I can always go get it. Like, it's not lost. I'll give it its due. But I must have fallen asleep because I woke up and my finger was like on the L key, and it was like a whole half page of just L's, of line after line after line of L. And I was like, oh. And I closed it, went right to sleep.
Wow. That's so, you see, I find these fascinating. This is so different than how my brain works.
Yeah.
And wow. I don't know. Maybe it's because I suck at typing. I'm not a very fast typer. Like I still have to
just
watch
write
my
it.
keys.
Oh, no.
And writing, even worse.
Oh, see, when I'm typing, my eyes are closed. Like, I leave my eyes closed because it's just getting the thoughts out. I don't care about spelling.
More like of a flow? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that's more like a flow exercise for you?
Probably.
Have you ever thought of it in that way?
Sure.
It's because most people
It's like
chasing
therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's my form of jettisoning like negative thought.
Yeah.
Just jettison out.
It's so interesting.
And I've had enough practice to witness my thoughts
Yeah.
and this, you're going to laugh, maybe not laugh. This is another practice I still do, and I just moved it on Wednesday. This was a trick, or not a trick. This is a technique I've learned that I share with all my coaching clients, and I still do it with me just as a safety hold, is if you're feeling really overwhelmed and you can't journal, whatever, get on your phone and schedule a worry hour where you literally put it on your to-dos, like mine's Wednesday at 2, and put it several days out. So today's, Saturday, or whatever day it is, but whatever day it is you're having this thought and this overwhelming and panic, go 3, 4, 5 days into the future and schedule it on your calendar, like at 1 o'clock, 2 p.m., noon. And what you do is every then next panic thought from that moment till the schedule, all you say is, oh, wait, Thursday at 2, Wednesday at 2. Oh, wait, I have it scheduled. I'm going to give it an entire 60 minutes where all I'm going to do is fret and worry and stress and give it its 100% concentration Wednesday at 2. And then it eases. And then the next time it bubbles up in the next 2 minutes, oh, Wednesday at 2.
So do you follow up with it on Wednesday at 2?
Well, here's the rub, and I use this with clients all the time. I'll ask them, how did your worry hour go? Oh, I completely forgot about it. Or I didn't even need it. Because by the time it comes up, all of that is gone. Because that's the learning, is none of that thought lasts forever. But if you park it in a conscious, I'm giving it its due, and I'm going to do nothing but...
Like in an intentful way.
Yes, intention.
Yeah.
You never use it. Because all of that, but the practice is, and this is where you can change how your brain thinks, and this is proven, it's the practice of seeing it, and putting it to Wednesday at 2, seeing it Wednesday at 2. You will slowly ease the effect it has on you. And that's true. So it's the practice of seeing your thoughts, and you can rewire your synapses because you've had decades of thinking one way. And that's why the affirmations help on a daily basis, because you're rewiring and believing finally and letting go of all the crap. It's just rinse and repeat of practice new brain thoughts and seeing your thoughts, not being them.
So with that, I'll kind of hit you with a question I try to ask everybody. Knowing what you know today, what would you tell your younger self? It has to be honest, heartfelt advice. You talking to
Just
the
wait.
16-year-old you.
Just wait. Just be patient. It's, the old adage, your 20s are your best, and then I got my 30s and they were better, and then my 40s were better. No, honestly, it's so cliche again, or just like rainbows and unicorns, but it's not. It's hard work, but it's what I would tell myself is it's all worth it. And just be present to every, because you're going to learn something from everything. The good, the bad, the ugly, the failure, the loss. And just be intentional. Practice being intentional. Or this is my other one is, what I would tell myself years ago is judge yourself only on decisions, never the outcome, because you can't control an outcome. You can only control a decision you make. So own your decisions. I would have liked to have known that many, many years ago.
I really like that
and
one.
Practice it, because it would have been so much easier. But again, we just talked about it, is you kind of have to go through it, because it makes you more aware and wiser and stronger. And then you made it through the tough stuff. And then that's the other thing is everything that comes up now is so small compared to all the bullshit from 20 years of trying to come out. It's so inconsequential.
So is it okay if you share maybe some of your details of your coaching practice, in case somebody watched this and was like, hey man, this seems like a great person to talk. Yeah. I'd really like if please feel free.
Oh yeah. Well, like
where
I said,
people reach you out or
take me
find
back
out?
to 2012. I remember, and I'm going to bow this a little bit with my own aha was, when I got certified, all of the same little group, it was all online for the first 6 weeks. But then all of us had to fly to Charleston, South Carolina for a 2-day practicum with the teacher or whatever, with the person. And I remember being terrified on the plane out there, journaling on the plane, as I talked about, oh my God, my eyes closed on the plane. What have I got myself into? What am I doing? I don't, I'm so And then during those 2 days, it was, learning, but then a little bit of confidence here, a little bit of confidence there. And when I got partnered with one of the other students and we had to do kind of a simulated coaching session with our affirmations and capture them, and I wrote them overnight and then had to voice them back to her the next day, she just was blown away. She was like, oh my God, you captured it so well. And that was a huge shift. Okay, wow, maybe this is something I'm just naturally good at. And I remember on the flight home, it was like I was a different person. And that was when I thought, holy shit, this could be it. And then that, to your point, is then about the business, I got a URL, which is thecoachingdean.com. But yeah, it's a intentional process. There's 12 sessions. Each one's about an hour, except the first session, and that's 2 hours minimum, because that's where I'm asking the person questions and about career, relationships, finances, health, lifestyle.
And I'm sure you'll go super deep with them if they reach out and figure it out and what you need. I'm assuming there has to be a commitment from them as well, that if you're going to work with them,
yeah. There's a 1-page agreement that we both sign. But it's interesting. The first session is all of them talking, and I get all of their goals across all these areas. The second session is I'm reading back to them their affirmations that they then use for the duration of the 3-month commitment, which then they play at night, overnight. So they listen to them as they fall asleep because your subconscious is not doubting. Your subconscious is not resisting. Your subconscious is letting every positive affirmation in uninhibited. And over time, with practice and repetition, that's how you retrain the synapses. And I've seen it in every client I have. There'll be a moment sometime weeks later, after weeks and weeks of listening to these same affirmations overnight, where they'll say something and I'm like, did you just hear yourself? And it's so powerful. And it's so simple in its application, but it's so powerful it's so impactful too.
Yeah.
It changes how they think.
I'm sure.
And that's the biggest aha is we're all doing, but focus on your thinking.
Well, to piggyback on your ahas, my biggest aha with this conversation was the ability for you to share and to be open. And I really appreciate it. And, it's hard. I hope you could see that you think you're ready and it's just tough having cameras and lights and talking about personal things. But I really appreciate you doing it and coming here and sharing a little bit about you. And I hope that whoever listens to this can hopefully hear some of your stories and relate and hopefully apply some of the same mentality that you've had towards it so that they can hopefully get something of value from this. And if anybody ever wants to know you shared, they could probably reach out to you and you could work with them if they feel like they want a little bit more time.
Or not just chat.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, I mean, you're not alone. And we all have the same thoughts. None of us are immune. You're not crazy in how you think. You're not alone in what you think. That was another big aha. It's just, we all have it. It's just how you process it.
Well, thank you for the time.
Thank you for this opportunity.
I appreciate you.
Cheers.
Bye.